"Get that Omega away from my children." The command tore through Blackwood Palace like thunder, and every servant in the royal nursery stopped breathing. Emily Carter froze beside the linen cabinet, a stack of folded blankets trembling in her arms. Across the room, King Alexander Blackwood stood in the doorway, broad shoulders filling the frame, dressed in black so severe it made the candlelight look weak. Men said he could silence rival packs with one stare. Tonight, he could not silence two toddlers. Noah and Lily were crying so hard their small bodies shook. Noah sat in his crib with tears soaking the front of his nightshirt, fists pressed to his chest as if something inside hurt. Lily stood gripping the rails, cheeks wet, curls tangled, screaming with the wild panic of a child who did not know how to explain pain. 3 nurses hovered uselessly nearby. A healer muttered over steaming herbs. Lady Margaret, the king's elegant cousin, wore the expression of a woman personally insulted by noise. "I warned you," she said sharply. They were calm until the lower staff entered. Her eyes slid to Emily like a knife finding its mark. Especially her. Emily lowered her head at once. She knew how rooms like this worked. If something shattered, blame rolled downhill. If someone cried, blame rolled downhill. If nobles were embarrassed, blame rolled downhill fastest of all. "I was only changing the sheets, Your Majesty," she whispered. Her voice nearly disappeared beneath Lily's sobs. Alexander's silver gaze landed on her. Cold. Tired. Dangerous. Yet beneath it all she saw something no one else in the palace ever mentioned. Fear. "Then leave," he said. Emily took one step back. Noah made a sound that stopped her. It was not a cry now. It was a thin, aching whimper so lonely it seemed to come from somewhere older than childhood. She turned before thinking. The little boy had curled tighter, breath hitching. Lily's screaming broke into gasps. Emily knew that look. She had seen frightened farm horses before storms, orphan children in market shelters, widowers staring at empty chairs. Some pain did not come from wounds. Some pain came from too much grief in a room too small to hold it. "Wait," she said softly. Lady Margaret gasped. "How dare you interrupt the king?" Alexander lifted one hand, silencing his cousin without taking his eyes off Emily. The nursery went still except for the twins. Emily set the blankets down and knelt several feet from the cribs. She kept her hands visible, palms open on the rug. Empty hands. Safe hands. Lily's cries faltered for 1 second. Noah blinked through tears and looked at her as though recognizing something he had lost. Emily's heart squeezed painfully. "No one is going to make you be brave right now," she whispered. "You can rest." The healer scoffed. "This is nonsense." Yet neither child looked at him. They looked only at her. Emily closed her eyes for one breath and reached for the memory of her mother's kitchen years ago. Rain on the roof. Warm bread cooling by the window. A gentle voice singing while the world outside argued with itself. When she opened her eyes, she began to hum. The melody was soft enough to be mistaken for wind. Lily's sobbing broke first. Noah's fists slowly loosened. The room changed so suddenly that even the candles seemed steadier. Alexander took one step into the nursery, then another, as if afraid sudden movement might ruin whatever miracle he was watching. Emily sang the first line aloud, quiet and warm. Noah's shoulders dropped. Lily let go of the crib rail and reached both hands toward the maid they had been told not to notice. Lady Margaret whispered, horrified, "What is she doing?" Alexander's jaw tightened as something fierce and protective moved behind his eyes. "Saving this room," he said. Then Lily spoke her first clear word of the night, stretching both arms toward Emily. "Mama." The word hit the nursery harder than a scream. "Mama." Every servant in the room stared at the little princess as if language itself had betrayed them. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Lily still reached for her with both arms, cheeks damp, lower lip trembling from the last of her tears. Noah had gone silent too, watching Emily with wide eyes that no longer looked frightened, only hopeful. Lady Margaret recovered first. Absolutely not. Her voice snapped through the stillness. Children repeat nonsense when distressed. Then why has she never said it to you? King Alexander asked without looking at her. The cut was clean enough to draw blood without raising a hand. A flush climbed Margaret's neck. Emily wished the floor would open and kindly swallow her whole. Your Majesty, she does not mean me, Emily said quickly. She is tired and confused. Lily's face crumpled at once. The little girl reached farther through the crib rails, making wounded sounds until Emily moved closer on instinct. The moment Emily took her small hands, the child relaxed again. Noah immediately stood in his crib and lifted both arms too. The healer stared. Impossible. You have said that several times tonight, Alexander replied. It grows less impressive each time. A nervous servant nearly laughed and disguised it as a cough. Emily carefully lifted Lily from the crib. The princess curled against her shoulder with the deep trust of someone who had already decided. Noah began protesting at once, reaching so hard he nearly toppled forward. Emily shifted him up with her free arm, surprised by how naturally both children fit there, warm and solid and sleepy. For the first time all night, the nursery became quiet. Not silent. Peaceful. Alexander stared at the scene as if he had stepped into someone else's memory. His children, calm in the arms of a woman no one in his palace had considered important enough to notice. Emily could feel the weight of his gaze and did not know where to put her own. Set them back down, Margaret said sharply. This attachment is unhealthy. Noah responded by burying his face against Emily's neck. Lily patted Emily's cheek as if comforting her from the rude voice nearby. Alexander's expression cooled several dangerous degrees. My children have not slept in 3 nights. He took another slow step forward. Tonight they are breathing evenly, no longer crying, and finally at peace. Margaret opened her mouth. Choose your next words carefully, he said. She closed it. Emily shifted nervously. Your Majesty, perhaps if I place them back in bed now, do it. His tone gentled when he spoke to her, which somehow startled the room more than shouting would have. Emily laid Noah down first. He grabbed her sleeve. Lily clutched her braid. It took both hands and a whispered promise that she was not leaving before they allowed blankets to cover them. Emily knelt between the cribs and hummed once more. Within seconds, Noah's lashes lowered. Lily's fingers loosened from Emily's hair. Sleep came over them like mercy. No one spoke. Even Margaret seemed wise enough to respect the moment. Alexander moved to the nearest crib and rested one hand lightly on Noah's blanket. The fierce lines of his face softened. Then he turned to Emily. Where did you learn that song? Emily rose slowly. My mother sang it during storms. What was her name? Grace Carter, sire. Something unreadable flickered in his silver eyes. Stay. She blinked. Your Majesty. Remain in the nursery tonight. The room gasped in unison. Margaret nearly dropped her fan. Emily felt every old instinct scream danger. I cannot sleep in royal rooms. You misunderstand, Alexander said. You will not be sleeping much. A hint of dry humor touched his mouth, gone before she could trust it was real. Then his gaze returned to the twins. If either child wakes crying, I want the first thing they see to be the woman who made them feel safe. Emily had spent 3 years in Blackwood Palace learning how to become invisible. Stand near walls. Speak only when spoken to. Never draw the eye of power. Yet now the most powerful man in the north was watching only her. You may refuse, King Alexander said. The word surprised everyone, including him, if the slight pause afterward meant anything. But if you leave, they will wake searching for you. Emily looked at the sleeping twins. Noah's hand still gripped the edge of her apron where it had slipped into the crib. Lily had turned toward the sound of Emily's breathing even in sleep, tiny fingers curled against her own cheek. The ache in Emily's chest deepened. She knew too well what it was to wake frightened and find no one there. "I will stay," she said softly. Relief moved through the room so quickly it was almost visible. The nurses sagged. A servant near the door crossed herself. "Lady." Margaret looked personally betrayed by peace. "Then I shall remain as well," Margaret announced. "To supervise." "No," Alexander said. "You shall sleep elsewhere and trouble someone less exhausted." A startled laugh escaped one of the younger maids before she smothered it behind both hands. Margaret stiffened like a frozen curtain. "Cousin, good night, Margaret." It was dismissal sharpened into art. She swept from the nursery with enough offended dignity to clothe a smaller nation. The healer bowed himself out soon after, muttering about unscientific conditions. One by one the room emptied until only Emily, the king, and the sleeping twins remained. The silence that followed felt intimate in a way Emily did not trust. Alexander removed his gloves and set them on a side table. Without the formal armor of court, he seemed less distant and somehow more dangerous for it. Real men could wound more deeply than legends. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the rocking chair between the cribs. Emily obeyed at once, folding herself carefully into the cushioned seat. He noticed the obedience and something dark crossed his face. "Regret, perhaps." "You do not need to fear every order I give. Habit is difficult to dismiss, Your Majesty." "Then I shall have to issue better ones." The answer came so dryly that she almost smiled. Almost. He crossed to the window where snow tapped softly against the glass. Beyond it, Blackwood Palace glowed under moonlight and storm clouds, towers rising like watchful shadows. "They were not always like this," he said quietly. "The crying. The fear." Emily kept her eyes on the twins. "When did it begin?" "After their mother died." Grief entered the room like a fourth person. Emily's throat tightened. She had heard whispers of Queen Alara's passing, but whispers never carried the shape of loss until spoken by the one left behind. "I am sorry." He nodded once, accepting sympathy the way proud men accepted bandages. They wake whenever too many voices crowd them. Whenever strangers insist on comfort. Whenever the palace remembers ceremony and forgets gentleness. Emily looked down at her hands. Faint warmth still glowed beneath her skin, hidden now. But restless. Children know when sorrow is pretending to be order. Alexander turned from the window slowly. "And you know this because?" She hesitated. "Because after my mother died, neighbors came with pies and opinions. None of it helped." For the first time that night, something softened fully in his eyes. Not kingly approval. Recognition. He stepped closer to the chair, gaze dropping to the twins asleep on either side of her. "You calm them as if they are your own." Emily's pulse stumbled. "They are yours." "Yes," he said. "That is why I notice who treats them like treasures." The nursery door opened suddenly. A frightened footman bowed from the threshold. "Your Majesty, forgive the hour. The Western delegation has arrived early, and Lord Halden demands an audience at dawn." Alexander's face became stone again. "Of course he does." Then he looked at Emily, at the twins sleeping because of her, and made a decision that changed the air in the room. "Good. Let him come. Tomorrow he will see who my children chose before the court chooses anything." By dawn, the entire palace knew. Servants carried the news faster than trays and twice as carefully. The Alpha King's heirs had slept through the night for the first time in weeks. They had done it beside an Omega Maid no one important had bothered to learn by name until yesterday. Emily Carter woke in the rocking chair with a blanket over her shoulders and sunlight across her lap. For one startled second, she thought she was back in her mother's cottage. Then she saw marble floors, carved cribs, and two royal children climbing over her like determined puppies. "Mimi awake," Lily declared, victorious. Noah had already stolen one of Emily's shoes and was hiding it beneath his blanket with criminal pride. Emily laughed before she remembered to be cautious. The sound brought Alexander from the adjoining study. He had changed into formal black, silver cuff links catching the morning light, hair still slightly damp from a hurried bath. He paused in the doorway when he heard her laugh, as if the sound belonged to a future he had not planned for. "Good morning," Emily said quickly, rising halfway. "Sit," he said. "You are being conquered." Noah chose that moment to climb directly into her lap. Lily followed with less strategy and more enthusiasm. Alexander's mouth almost curved. "Almost. I see my children have embraced chaos. They are energetic," Emily offered. "That is a generous word." A knock came at the nursery doors. Before anyone answered, Lady Margaret swept in wearing pearl grey silk and a smile polished sharp enough to cut. Behind her trailed 2 attendants carrying garment boxes. "The Western delegation has requested breakfast with the household," she announced. "Since we cannot hide this situation, I have come to repair it." Her eyes landed on Emily's plain dress with visible offense. "That will not do." Emily instinctively touched the worn sleeve. "My lady, I can return to servant quarters." Noah wrapped both arms around her waist at once. Lily glared at Margaret with the full fury available to a 3-year-old. Alexander did not even glance at his cousin. "You will do no such thing." Margaret's smile tightened. "Cousin, Lord Halden arrives with his daughter. If you intend negotiations, appearances matter." "They do," Alexander said. "Which is why my children will appear calm." He turned to Emily. "You will accompany us to breakfast." The room inhaled sharply. Emily nearly dropped Lily. "Your Majesty, I am not fit for a royal table." "Neither is most of the royal table," he replied. One attendant choked on a laugh and converted it into a cough. Margaret's eyes flashed. "She is a maid. She is the reason my heirs slept." He finally looked at his cousin then, silver eyes cool enough to frost glass. "Today, that outranks many titles." Emily's pulse raced so hard she could hear it. Margaret thrust a garment box toward an attendant. "Then at least dress the girl before the nobles mistake kindness for madness." Within minutes Emily was surrounded by brisk hands, buttons, brushes, ribbons, and scandalized whispers. They changed her into a modest deep blue gown of soft wool with pearl buttons at the collar. Her chestnut hair was brushed loose in waves she barely recognized as her own. When the attendants stepped back, even Margaret hesitated for one surprised heartbeat before remembering to disapprove. Alexander looked up from fastening Noah's tiny coat. He went still. His gaze traveled once, not rudely, but thoroughly enough to make Emily's breath catch. "Acceptable," he said at last, voice lower than before. Margaret stared at him as if betrayed by adjectives. Emily bent to smooth Lily's curls so no one would see her blush. A second knock sounded, firmer now. The butler entered pale and formal. "Your Majesty, Lord Halden and Lady Celeste await in the East Dining Hall. They request to meet the future Queen." The nursery turned silent. Margaret smiled slowly. Emily looked down at the children in her arms. Alexander took one measured step toward the door. "Excellent," he said. Then he held out his hand to Emily. "Let us disappoint them together." Emily stared at the king's outstretched hand as if it belonged to someone else's story. No one had ever invited her anywhere important, much less into battle disguised as breakfast. "Your Majesty," she began. "Take the hand, dear," Lady Margaret said sweetly. "If only so we may all witness the mistake properly." Alexander did not look at his cousin. Emily. The use of her name, spoken low and certain, did more to steady her than courage ever had. She placed her fingers in his. Warmth flashed through her palm, quick as moonlight on water. Alexander's silver eyes sharpened for one unreadable heartbeat, then he closed his hand around hers and led her from the nursery. The palace corridors fell silent as they passed. Servants flattened themselves to walls. Guards looked suddenly fascinated by ceilings. News moved ahead of them like wine through dry leaves. By the time they reached the east dining hall, every noble guest within already knew something impossible was about to walk through the door. The room glittered with crystal, polished silver, and expensive opinions. A table long enough to host grudges from 3 generations stretched beneath chandeliers bright as frozen stars. Lords in tailored coats and ladies jeweled enough to sink in rivers turned as one when the doors opened. Alexander entered first carrying Noah on one arm. Emily followed with Lily perched on her hip, one small hand tangled in Emily's hair. Gasps rippled openly now. At the center of the hall stood Lord Victor Halden, broad-shouldered and elegantly severe in dark green velvet. Beside him was Lady Celeste Halden, dressed in winter white silk, poised with the calm beauty of someone raised to be admired before she could walk. Her smile was gracious. Her eyes missed nothing. Lord Halden bowed to the king, then let his gaze slide to Emily. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly. "We had hoped to greet the royal household." "You are doing so," Alexander replied. Halden's smile tightened. "I had heard rumors. I assumed servants had exaggerated them." "Servants usually improve accuracy by removing vanity," Alexander said. Several guests coughed into napkins to hide laughter. Emily wished she could become furniture. Lily, traitorously content, kissed Emily's cheek and settled deeper against her shoulder. Celeste stepped forward with practiced warmth. "The children look well this morning." "That is a blessing." Her voice was lovely and measured, neither cruel nor false. She approached Lily slowly and held out her hands. "May I say hello?" Emily glanced instinctively at Alexander. He gave one slight nod. Emily lowered Lily carefully. The little princess studied Celeste in solemn silence. For one hopeful second, the room leaned forward. Then Lily turned around, marched 3 determined steps back to Emily, and demanded to be picked up again. Laughter burst from the far end of the table before being strangled into decorum. Celeste's smile flickered but held. "Selective," she said lightly. "Intelligent," murmured a duchess nearby. Noah chose that moment to lean from Alexander's arms toward Emily. "Mimi." The prince's clear little voice landed harder than any speech. Emily's eyes stung unexpectedly. Halden's expression cooled. "Children form attachments quickly," he said. "They also forget quickly." "Then I suppose we shall test your theory," Alexander replied. He moved to the head of the table and pulled out the chair beside his own. Not for Celeste. For Emily. The hall went dead still. "Sit," he said. "Your Majesty, I cannot. You already are the reason this meal is possible." His gaze held hers. "Do not make me ask twice in front of people who would enjoy it." A laugh escaped her before fear could stop it. She sat. Shock rolled through the room like thunder. Margaret looked ready to faint from offense. Celeste lowered gracefully into the seat opposite Emily, studying her with new curiosity rather than contempt. Lord Halden remained standing. "You risk confusion, sire." Alexander cut into a strawberry with calm precision. "No, Lord Halden. I am ending it." He looked to Emily, then to the assembled court. "For the duration of this visit, Miss Emily Carter speaks for the children's household." Forks froze midair. Margaret made a strangled sound. And across the table, Celeste Halden smiled for real the first time. The dining hall did not recover quickly. Nobles who had spent lifetimes mastering expression now struggled to arrange their faces into anything but shock. A countess dropped her spoon into her tea. One baron began coughing from swallowing too fast. Lady Margaret closed her eyes briefly, perhaps to mourn civilization. Emily sat beside the king as still as carved wood, terrified that movement alone might prove she did not belong there. Lily, meanwhile, had discovered the sugar bowl and considered it a personal challenge. "Miss Carter speaks for the children's household," Lord Halden repeated, as though hearing the sentence twice might improve it. Surely I misunderstood. You did not, Alexander said. He sliced another strawberry with deliberate calm. How temporary is this appointment? Halden asked. As temporary as it proves wise. The answer revealed nothing and therefore everything. Emily kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. Celeste Halden watched her with open interest now, no mockery in it. Then I should address the proper authority. She turned gracefully toward Emily. Miss Carter, what routine best suits the heirs during visitors? The room leaned in so hard it nearly tipped. Emily blinked. She had expected insult, not sincerity. Quiet voices help, she said carefully. No crowding. No strangers reaching for them without warning. They prefer choices to commands. Celeste nodded as if receiving. Military intelligence. Sensibly run children are rarer than gemstones. A few guests laughed. Even Alexander's mouth nearly betrayed amusement. Lord Halden did not laugh. My daughter has managed younger cousins for years, he said. She would be an asset here. Noah chose that moment to throw a grape at his future perhaps stepmother. It bounced harmlessly off Celeste's sleeve and rolled across the table. The hall froze. Celeste looked down at the grape, then back at Noah. Slowly, she picked it up and set it beside her plate. An opening move, she said. Bold, but underripe. Laughter broke openly this time. Noah grinned in instant respect. Emily nearly smiled herself. Halden's jaw tightened. The prince requires discipline. The prince requires breakfast, Alexander said. Discipline may wait until after eggs. Servants rushed to refill cups no one needed. Margaret leaned forward, voice sweet enough to rot teeth. Emily, dear, perhaps you should take the children upstairs once they finish. Court matters can become complicated. Emily recognized dismissal dressed as kindness. Before she could answer, Lily banged a spoon on the table. Mimi, stay. Noah echoed with equal authority. Stay. Several nobles laughed again. Margaret did not. Alexander set down his knife. It appears the heirs have spoken. Children do not govern kingdoms, Margaret snapped. No, said a dry voice from the doorway. But they often expose fools. Lady Miriam entered with her cane tapping like judgment itself. Every person rose except Lily, who waved enthusiastically. The oracle took the empty seat beside Celeste without invitation. What have I missed? A constitutional crisis involving fruit, Celeste said. Miriam smiled at her. I begin to like you. Halden looked offended by this development. Miriam accepted tea, sniffed it critically, then addressed Emily. Miss Carter, do the twins nap before noon? Usually after, my lady. Good. Then we have time. She turned to Alexander. You promised these people stability. Present it. Meaning, the king asked. Miriam looked around the hall at jeweled hunger, ambition wrapped in manners, and old families measuring opportunity with every glance. Then she pointed one bony finger directly at Emily. Meaning if this palace wishes peace, stop pretending the answer is temporary. The room fell silent enough to hear candles burn. Halden straightened. Margaret smiled sharply. Celeste watched Alexander with keen interest. Emily forgot how to breathe. And the king, after one long unreadable moment, rose from his chair and walked toward her. No one in the east dining hall moved as King Alexander crossed the distance between them. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Emily rose too quickly, nearly upsetting her water glass, and immediately wished she had remained seated. Standing only made it easier for everyone to see how badly her hands were trembling. Alexander stopped in front of her, close enough that she caught the clean scent of cedar, winter air, and something warm beneath both. His silver gaze lifted to meet hers. You are frightened, he said quietly. Yes, Your Majesty. Good. It means you understand the room. A few nobles strained to overhear. Most failed. Emily swallowed. Then perhaps I should leave it. No. The word was soft, absolute, and far more dangerous than shouting. He turned from her and addressed the assembled court. For weeks, my children have refused every nurse, healer, tutor, and noble volunteer offered to them. Several guests suddenly found their plates fascinating. Alexander continued. Last night they slept. This morning they laughed. Today they eat without tears. He looked back at Emily. Because one woman gave them what this palace forgot to provide. Lady Margaret folded her fan with a crack. Luck. Consistency, Miriam corrected. Do keep up. Lord Halden rose slowly. No one questions the maid's usefulness. We question whether usefulness should influence royal policy. Everything useful should influence policy, Alexander said. It would be a refreshing change. Laughter escaped before manners could stop it. Halden's expression hardened. Then state your intention plainly. The challenge landed in the center of the table like a gauntlet. Emily felt every eye swing toward her, then to the king. Alexander did not hesitate. Miss Emily. Carter will remain at Blackwood Palace as royal governess to the heirs, with authority over their daily household and welfare. Gasps rolled across the hall. A viscountess nearly dropped her pearls. Margaret stood so abruptly her chair screeched across stone. You cannot elevate a maid above titled households. Watch me, Alexander said. The room went silent again. Emily could barely hear through the rush of blood in her ears. Royal governess. Authority. None of those words belonged anywhere near her name. Your Majesty, she whispered, I am not trained for such a post. Alexander looked at her fully then, not as king to servant, but as one person seeing another clearly. You calmed fear without force. You earned trust without demanding it. You placed my children first when everyone else placed themselves first. His voice lowered. That training is rarer than etiquette. Something in Emily's chest broke open quietly. Celeste Halden leaned forward, smiling with genuine admiration now. For what it is worth, Miss Carter, I agree with him. Halden stared at his daughter as if betrayed by bloodline itself. Noah suddenly climbed down from his chair, toddled around the table, and wrapped both arms around Emily's knees. Lily followed with less balance and greater determination. The hall watched in stunned silence as both heirs attached themselves to the former maid like ivy to stone. Miriam sipped tea. The children continued to outperform adults. Margaret's face had gone pale with fury. This is sentiment. It will pass. Perhaps, Alexander said. Then he did something no one in the room expected. He reached for Emily's hand in full view of the court and lifted it just enough for everyone to see. A faint silver warmth shimmered across her palm where his touched it. Several nobles gasped outright. Miriam smiled into her cup. Moonsoothe answers moonblood. Well. That complicates gossip nicely. Emily stared at their joined hands, stunned. Alexander's thumb brushed once across her knuckles, steadying more than skin. No, he said, eyes still on hers. This will not pass. The great doors opened before anyone could recover. A captain of the guard strode in and bowed. Sharply. Your Majesty, the nursery repairs are complete. But there is another matter. Someone has removed every portrait of Queen Alara from the West Wing. The room changed instantly. A moment ago it had been scandal, gossip, and the dangerous warmth of Alexander's hand around hers. Now grief entered like a draft under every door. Emily felt the king's fingers loosen, then leave hers entirely. The sudden absence startled her more than the touch had. Alexander turned toward the captain of the guard, expression hardening into something colder than anger. Repeat that. Every portrait of Queen Alara in the West Wing, sire. Removed from walls and storage alcoves. Staff discovered it minutes ago. Noah looked up at his father, sensing the shift. Lily pressed closer to Emily's skirts. Lord Halden straightened, sensing weakness where better men would have sensed pain. Lady Margaret placed a hand dramatically over her chest. How dreadful. Such disrespect in a season of mourning. Miriam snorted. Your talent for arriving beside trouble remains impressive. Margaret's hand dropped at once. Alexander's gaze swept the room. No one leaves this hall until I say otherwise. Several nobles stiffened. You suspect guests? Halden asked coolly. I suspect people, Alexander replied. Guests merely save me time. He crossed to Noah and lifted the boy with one practiced arm. The prince immediately leaned back toward Emily. Lily, unwilling to be outdone, reached upward too. Emily picked her up automatically. Alexander noticed and gave the smallest nod, as if acknowledging a partnership no one else had earned the right to name. Miss Carter, he said, voice clipped now. Bring Lily. Stay beside me. The command sent a fresh wave of whispers through the hall. Emily obeyed, pulse racing. They moved through the west corridor with guards ahead and behind, nobles trailing at a cautious distance because curiosity outruns dignity every time. The west wing had once belonged to Queen Alara. Emily knew that much from servant talk. Fewer people came there now. Fewer lights were lit. When they entered, the damage was obvious not because anything was broken, but because everything was missing. Pale rectangles marked the walls where frames had hung for years. Empty hooks remained like accusations. Dust outlines showed where smaller portraits had stood on tables. A long gallery that should have held memory now looked stripped and ashamed. Alexander stopped in the center of the corridor. For one rare second, he looked wounded. Noah touched his father's cheek. Papa sad? The king closed his eyes briefly, then kissed the boy's hair. Only for a moment. Emily's chest tightened. Lily twisted in her arms and pointed toward a narrow side door near the gallery end. There. Everyone turned. The door stood slightly open. A storage room beyond lay dim and narrow. Guards rushed forward, but Alexander was already moving. Inside, stacked carefully against the wall, were every missing portrait and frame, untouched, wrapped in dust cloths as though prepared for transport. No vandalism. No theft. Something stranger. At the room's center sat one portrait uncovered. Alara smiling in a garden, one twin on each hip, sunlight in her hair. And laid across the bottom of the frame was a single white rose. Margaret gasped theatrically. Halden frowned. Miriam leaned on her cane and looked bored by everyone except the facts. Alexander knelt before the portrait, jaw tight. Who entered this wing last night? He asked the captain. Only regular staff, sire. And... The captain hesitated. Say it. Lady Margaret requested access after supper. She said she wished to pray privately. Silence hit like a bell. Every head turned. Margaret went pale so quickly even rouge could not save her. How dare you imply? I imply nothing, Alexander said, rising slowly. I am asking why you moved my wife's portraits in the middle of the night. Margaret's lips trembled with outrage or fear. Because this palace must move forward. Because every corridor still worships a ghost while the kingdom waits for a queen. The confession rang down the empty hall. Noah buried his face in Alexander's shoulder. Lily tightened both arms around Emily's neck. Margaret pointed wildly at Emily. And now you replace her with a maid? Alexander's silver eyes turned glacial. No one can replace Alara. His gaze shifted briefly to Emily, softer and infinitely more dangerous. But no one will dishonor her again either. Then he held out his free hand toward Emily in front of everyone. Come stand with us. Emily could feel every eye in the west wing when Alexander offered his hand. The corridor still smelled of dust and old cedar, of memories disturbed and pride exposed. Lady Margaret stood rigid beside the storage room, stripped of elegance by her own confession. Lord Halden watched with narrowed interest. Celeste watched with something gentler, as though she already knew the story had turned. Emily held Lily close and stared at the king's outstretched hand. This time she understood what it meant. Not romance. Not yet. Position. Public choice. Protection in front of enemies. Her fingers trembled as she placed them in his. Warmth flashed again, soft silver beneath her skin. A murmur ran through the gathered nobles. Alexander closed his hand around hers and turned back toward the gallery walls. "Captain," he said. "Return every portrait exactly where it stood." "At once, sire." Guards moved immediately, lifting frames with sudden reverence. Servants hurried to fetch ladders, cloths, nails, and lamps. Within moments the empty hall became purposeful motion. Margaret found her voice. "You humiliate me for trying to preserve the kingdom." "No," Alexander said calmly. "I humiliate no one. You accomplished that alone." Several nobles looked down to hide satisfaction. Margaret's breath sharpened. "The court needs certainty. The children need a mother. You cling to grief while outsiders circle your throne. And you thought stealing memory would create stability?" Miriam asked dryly from her place near the doorway. "How creative." Margaret's eyes flashed toward Emily. This girl bewitched them all. Noah lifted his head from Alexander's shoulder. "Mean lady." The prince's sleepy accusation landed harder than a speech. Even a guard coughed to hide laughter. Margaret went crimson. Lily, not to be outdone, pointed from Emily's arms. "No, yell Mimi." Celeste covered her smile with one gloved hand. Halden did not bother hiding his amusement now that someone else wore the embarrassment. Alexander's jaw tightened, but when he spoke, his voice remained controlled. "You will apologize to Miss Carter." Gasps spread like sparks. Margaret stared. "To a servant?" "To the woman comforting my children while you distress them." The corridor held its breath. Margaret's gaze moved from Alexander to the nobles, calculating whether outrage still had allies. She found very few. Even those who disliked Emily enjoyed seeing arrogance cornered more. At last Margaret forced the words through clenched teeth. "My apologies. Miss Carter." Emily lowered her eyes. "Thank you, my lady." She did not add triumph to it. That somehow made Margaret angrier. One by one the portraits returned to their places. Queen Alara smiled again from gilded frames, holding babies, standing in gardens, laughing beside a younger Alexander. The gallery slowly became whole. Emily watched the king as the last portrait was hung. His shoulders eased by an inch. Grief still lived there, but no longer alone. Halden stepped forward, sensing the moment to negotiate had changed but not vanished. "Your Majesty, perhaps we all spoke too sharply this morning. My daughter and I came seeking alliance, not discord." Celeste nodded once. "That is true." Alexander looked at them without hostility now, only clarity. "Then let us be clear. My children's peace is not a bargaining chip. Neither is Miss Carter." Emily's breath caught. Halden measured the room and accepted defeat with practiced grace. "Understood." Celeste surprised everyone by approaching Emily first. She offered a small respectful bow. "For what it is worth, I hope they keep choosing you." Then she turned and walked back to her father. Lily waved at her. "Pretty lady." Celeste laughed outright. When the Western delegation withdrew, much of the tension left with them. Servants finished straightening frames. Snowlight spilled through high windows. Alexander finally faced Emily again, their hands still joined though neither had noticed when they forgot to separate. Noah yawned. Lily rested her head on Emily's shoulder. The king glanced at the restored portraits of Alara, then back at Emily. "Come with me," he said quietly. "There is something my wife asked me to do if this day ever came." Alexander led them beyond the west gallery into a smaller corridor few servants ever used. The noise of the palace faded behind thick stone walls until only their footsteps and the soft breathing of the twins remained. Emily carried Lily, while Noah rode sleepily against his father's shoulder, one hand tangled in Alexander's collar. Guards stopped at the archway without being told. Whatever lay ahead belonged to family, not court. The room they entered was round and sunlit despite the winter outside, lined with tall windows overlooking the snow-covered gardens. Shelves of books curved along one wall. Toys rested in woven baskets. A rocking horse stood near the hearth beside a tiny table covered in crooked drawings made by impatient little hands. It was not a royal chamber. It was a lived-in one. The morning room, Alexander said. Ilara used it when the palace became too loud. Emily turned slowly, taking in the warmth of it. It is beautiful. It was hers. He crossed to a walnut cabinet built into the wall and opened it with a key from his pocket. Inside lay neatly stacked letters, ribbons, pressed flowers, and children's keepsakes saved with care. From the back he withdrew a flat velvet box darkened by age. Emily instinctively stepped back. Your Majesty, I should not be here for private things. You are here because she wanted you to be. The words landed so softly that Emily wondered if she had imagined them. Alexander set Noah onto a cushioned chair and motioned for Emily to sit with Lily on the sofa. Both twins seemed content in the quiet room, as if memory itself soothed them. He remained standing for a moment, staring at the box before opening it. Inside rested a silver chain with a moon-shaped pendant set around a pale blue stone that caught the light like frozen water. Ilara's Luna seal, he said. Queens wore it during formal ceremonies, but she preferred it here while reading stories to the children. Emily shook her head immediately. I cannot touch that. You can. His gaze lifted to hers. Before she died, Ilara made me promise something. The room stilled. Even the fire seemed to listen. She knew the children would grieve. She knew I would bury myself in duty and call it strength. A shadow of pain crossed his face. She said if another woman ever brought peace back to this family, I was to stop punishing all of us for surviving her. Emily's eyes burned. She said that? In language considerably sharper than mine. For the first time in hours, a real smile touched his mouth. It vanished quickly, but not before changing the whole room. He stepped closer and held out the pendant. This is not a crown. It is not a promise I ask of you. It is a symbol that the children's household answers to no one but me. Emily stared at the silver moon. Why give it to me? Because they trust you. Because I trust you. Because the court must learn there are places ambition cannot enter. Her fingers trembled as she accepted the pendant. The chain was cool for only a second before warming in her palm. A faint silver shimmer spread across the stone, brighter than before. Lily clapped delightedly. Noah pointed with solemn authority. Pretty. Emily looked up in alarm. I did not mean to do that. Neither did the moon, came Miriam's dry voice from the doorway. No one had heard her enter. She leaned on her cane and regarded the glowing pendant with satisfaction. Old gifts wake when finally offered honest hands. Alexander exhaled. Do you ever knock? I do. People ignore it because they fear what follows. She looked to Emily. Wear it. Emily hesitated. I am not worthy of a queen's seal. Miriam snorted. Worthiness is usually claimed by those lacking it. Put it on. Alexander stepped behind Emily before she could protest again. His fingers brushed the back of her neck as he fastened the chain. The touch was brief, careful, and somehow more intimate than an embrace. Emily's pulse stumbled wildly. When he stepped back, the blue stone rested against her collarbone, glowing softly. The twins cheered as though a festival had begun. Miriam smiled toward the window. Well then. That settles one matter. What matter? Alexander asked. The oracle's eyes sharpened. The council is gathering in the Great Hall. They intend to challenge your decision, and Demand the pendant be removed from her throat. By the time they reached the great hall, the palace already felt divided. Servants lined the outer corridors in nervous silence. Guards stood straighter than usual, sensing that words inside the chamber might carry more danger than weapons ever could. Emily walked one step behind Alexander with Lily in her arms and Noah holding tightly to the king's hand. The silver moon pendant rested warm against her collarbone, glowing faintly beneath the neckline of her blue gown. She wanted to hide it. There was nowhere to hide in a throne room. The great hall doors opened to a wall of sound. Council elders, noble representatives, merchants with purchased titles, and distant relatives with inherited opinions all spoke at once until Alexander entered. Then silence dropped hard enough to hear banners stir overhead. At the center of the chamber stood Lady Margaret, composed once more and dressed for victory. Beside her were 3 senior counselors and Lord Halden, who looked less eager than trapped by momentum. Celeste stood a pace behind her father, watching everything with clear eyes. "Your Majesty," said Councillor Bren, bowing stiffly. "We requested audience regarding a matter of grave concern." Alexander continued forward until he reached the foot of the dais. "Then be concise." "My children have not napped." A few mouths twitched despite themselves. Bren did not. The Luna seal of Queen Alara now hangs around the neck of a servant girl. Murmurs spread. Emily's fingers tightened around Lily. "Miss Carter is not a servant girl," Alexander said. "She is royal governess to the heirs." Appointed without council approval, Margaret added smoothly. "In private chambers. During the night." The implication slithered through the room exactly as intended. Emily's face burned. Noah looked up at the angry voices and moved closer to Alexander's leg. Lily frowned at Margaret with open dislike. Bren lifted both hands. No one questions compassion toward the children. But symbols matter. The seal represents the Queen's place. Then perhaps act as if the Queen's children matter as much as her jewelry, Miriam said from the side. Entrance. She entered to immediate silence, cane tapping once across stone. "You people are loudest whenever least useful." Margaret ignored the jab. "Tradition protects order." "Tradition also once approved bathing twice a year," Miriam replied. "We adapted." Even Halden coughed to hide a laugh. Bren's jaw tightened. "The council therefore requests the pendant be returned until a proper future queen is chosen." Alexander's silver eyes turned glacial. "Requested by whom?" Several nobles looked at one another. No one spoke first. Finally Margaret stepped forward. "By those who care for the kingdom's image." Alexander nodded once, as though something had become easier. "Excellent. Then let us discuss image." He turned, extending a hand toward Emily. "Come here." Her knees nearly failed, but she obeyed. He drew her to stand beside him before the full court. The pendant glowed brighter as if aware of attention. Gasps moved through the chamber. Alexander faced the room. 3 nights ago my heirs screamed through darkness while healers failed, tutors fled, and concerned nobles sent advice from comfortable beds. No one moved. This woman entered their nursery with no title, no allies, and no expectation of reward. She gave them peace. His voice deepened. Yesterday they laughed. Today they ate. Tonight they will sleep again because of her. Emily's eyes stung. Margaret lifted her chin. "That does not make her queen." "No one said it did," Alexander replied. "But it does make her worthy of respect, which is more than I can say for half this room." A stunned hush followed. Then Noah tugged free, marched to Emily, and wrapped himself around her leg. Lily leaned from Emily's arms to kiss her cheek loudly enough for everyone to hear. Soft laughter broke out among the servants lining the walls. Celeste smiled openly now. Halden sighed the sigh of a man watching defeat become public. Bren tried once more. "Symbols cannot be ruled by children's feelings." "No," Alexander said. "They should be ruled by truth." He looked at Emily, then at the pendant. And the truth is this seal has never shown for any hand since Alara died. Every gaze snapped to the moonstone now glowing. Clear blue like captured dawn. Miriam's smile turned dangerous. It appears the queen has voted. For one impossible heartbeat, no one in the great hall breathed. The moonstone at Emily's throat shone with a clear blue radiance that touched marble floors, gilded pillars, and the faces of everyone who had doubted her. Then the chamber erupted. Nobles spoke over one another. Counselors demanded order. Servants at the walls tried and failed to hide their delight. Lady Margaret looked as though insult itself had become physical. Alexander did not raise his voice. He simply lifted one hand. Silence crashed down at once. Enough. The single word rang through the banners overhead. Emily stood beside him trembling, Lily still in her arms, Noah pressed warmly against her skirt. She wanted to disappear. Instead the pendant continued to glow, refusing modesty on her behalf. Counselor Bren found his courage first. A reacting jewel proves nothing. Then remove it, Margaret said sharply. If it belongs to the late queen, let it reject the impostor now. Gasps rippled. Emily instinctively touched the moonstone. It pulsed once beneath her fingers like a living heartbeat. Alexander's expression turned lethal calm. Choose your next sentence carefully, Margaret. Why? She snapped. Because the maid has enchanted you as well? The room recoiled. Even those who disliked Emily knew she had stepped too far. Alexander moved before thought could keep pace. Not violently, not loudly. He simply stepped between Margaret and Emily with such final authority that the distance itself became punishment. You will speak to Miss Carter with respect, he said. Or not at all. Margaret laughed once, brittle and desperate. Respect must be earned. Then you should begin practicing immediately. Soft, dangerous laughter rolled through the hall. Celeste Halden did not bother hiding her smile now. Lord Halden looked at the ceiling as though regretting several life choices. Bren tried again. Your Majesty, personal affection cannot guide state symbols. This has nothing to do with affection, Alexander said. Then he turned to the assembly. Bring the royal records. A steward hurried forward with an iron-bound ledger so old 2 servants carried it together. Alexander opened it upon the council table, pages whispering like dry leaves. He turned several entries with practiced certainty before stopping. Read. Bren leaned in reluctantly. His eyes widened. The Luna seal responds only in the presence of one who protects the heirs in truth, or one recognized by the royal bloodline. Murmurs exploded again. Miriam smiled like winter enjoying itself. How inconvenient for conspiracy. Margaret's color drained. Emily stared at the page as if it might vanish. Alexander closed the ledger and looked down at Noah. Do you recognize Miss Carter? Yes. Do you trust her? Yes. He looked to Lily. And you? Lily hugged Emily's neck tighter. Mine. Laughter broke openly now, even among guards. Alexander's gaze lifted to the court. There is your bloodline testimony. Tears burned unexpectedly behind Emily's eyes. No one had ever stood between her and humiliation before. No one had ever turned a room full of power into witnesses for her dignity. Margaret made one final attempt. And what place does she hold then? Governess? Keeper? Pet charity? The insult had barely landed when Noah frowned and stomped one small foot. No mean Mimi. Lily copied him instantly. No mean. Their outrage, tiny and wholehearted, broke the last resistance in the hall. Smiles spread. A merchant laughed aloud. One council elder muttered, children have better sense than ministers. Alexander took Emily's hand in front of everyone. The pendant flared brighter where their skin met. His thumb steadied her shaking fingers. Her place, he said, voice carrying to the farthest wall, is wherever my children are safe, wherever this household is whole, and wherever I decide she stands. The hall went silent again, but differently this time. Not with hostility. With realization. Then a young guard at the rear doors burst in, breathless and pale. "Your Majesty, forgive me. There is a woman at the outer gates claiming to know Miss Carter's true birth name, and she carries Queen Alara's personal seal." The great hall had not finished absorbing one shock before another arrived at its doors. A woman at the outer gates. Queen Alara's personal seal. Miss Carter's true birth name. The words moved through the chamber like sparks through dry grass. Nobles straightened. Counselors whispered. Servants at the walls forgot every lesson about composure. Emily felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "My true birth name," she repeated softly. She had only ever been Emily Carter. Daughter of Grace Carter. Orphan. Maid. Invisible girl with careful hands. Alexander's grip on her hand tightened, steady and warm. "Bring her in," he ordered. The young guard ran at once. Margaret recovered enough to sneer. Convenient timing. Another performance. "You continue to mistake the world for your habits," Miriam said. "It is not arranged around you." Noah climbed into Emily's free arm. Lily remained on the other side, creating a determined fortress of children around her. Emily could barely breathe through the pounding of her heart. Minutes later the great doors opened again. An elderly woman entered wrapped in a weather-worn cloak dusted with snow. She leaned on a wooden cane, but her eyes were bright and unwavering. Around her neck hung a chain bearing the unmistakable crest of Queen Alara. The entire hall bowed instinctively. Even Margaret dipped late and unwillingly. The woman stopped before Emily and studied her face with painful tenderness. "Those eyes," she whispered. "Grace's eyes exactly." Emily's knees nearly failed. "You knew my mother?" "I served her," the woman said. "And before that, I served Queen Alara as nursery keeper." She turned to Alexander and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty. Forgive the delay of years." "State your name," he said. "Martha Vale. Keeper of the Western Nursery until the Queen's passing." Miriam nodded once. "Reliable. Sharp. Annoyingly alive." Martha smiled faintly, then faced the court. Grace Carter was not born Carter. The hall leaned in. She was Grace Ashbourne, younger sister to Queen Alara's mother. She fled court at 17 to escape an arranged match and chose a common life instead.